Dear Craftworldians, Marko Miladinović is with you and welcome to a second part of Sir Roderick paint-along tutorial. In previous lesson I guided you through steps of painting Sir Roderick's face. Today I will guide you through my steps of painting his beard, hair and tunic. Sir Roderick is a miniature from Collective Studio, and for this series our patrons have access to STL of this model to print and paint following these lessons or some other of our tutorials. Without further ado, let's start with shading hair. By the way, I suggest you to watch these videos in order. From part 1, where you can see my process of creating an underpainting for this character. I'm using magenta paint to shade some of his hair section and create first hair volumes, mostly around the face. I added shade beneath the eyebrows and in some of the beard sections. I mix maple yellow with primary red to create this orange tone, and I'm using tip of my brush to leave first hair strokes of Sir Roderick mustache and beard. My main focus is to apply this orange as a mid-tone to all the light placements of the beard, creating a contrast between the shades and light areas, and with that getting the idea of beard and facial volumes. As I'm proceeding to a lighter values, I'm adding more Naples yellow in the mix. I'm applying these layers in the same brush strokes over the light placement areas. I focus to cover less of an area than in previous step, by trying to keep the previous layer visible. With proceeding to further highlights, I started adding white paint to brighten Naples yellow. Once again, I'm repeating the same brush strokes over light areas. But as I go lighter, I'm shrinking the light spread areas, horizontally and vertically. Above the eye areas, I'm leaving the lightest value on the top of the brows. The same procedure is repeated for the hair, only this time I have bigger length of the hair surface. Hair with these curves also have higher contrast and volumes. Once I signified the shade sections of the hair area, I applied mix between primary red and Naples yellows as an orange tone, to signify the light placement areas. Once again, I am using brush strokes as a hair texture, following the scalp. The strongest light in this ambience will hit the top of the head. Even with having all of this light spread at the top of the Sir Roderick's head, I want to have interactions of shades and lights to achieve volumes. Proceeding to a lighter values, first I added more of the Naples yellow in the mix, following by addition of white paint to brighten the highlights. Sir Roderick have a tunic with heraldry. Let's start with that. And what's more golden than the sun. I made mix between magenta, primary red and Naples yellow, achieving these reddish tones that I'm applying as a base tone of the ornament. As I'm applying it in thin layer, the paint consistency is not too opaque, meaning I have some transparency, which affects the tone of the color. Being affected with the ultramarine underpainting, this tone is getting different look than the tones of the hair. Continuing to add light placements, I am focusing on the shape of the ornament but also on the folds of the tunic, deciding the shapes and size of the light areas. As you can notice, I am softly moving the paint applied with the tip of my brush, which helps me blend the transition between tones. This time I want to keep as much as underpainting in Tunic as possible, but I also want to add more interest in the tonal values and variation as well as feel of texture. I start with a very thin layer of ultramarine blue, leaving soft brush strokes and thin paint. Before the layer dried, I proceed to add Naples yellow into the mix with ultramarine to get warmer tone, and proceeded to apply it and move it around with the tip of my brush to create a blend. In shade areas, I focus on leaving bigger and more muted soft brush strokes, while in the light areas I am focusing on leaving texture with the tip of my brush, with movements that have a flow. These brushstrokes movement and tiny fabric textures add more to the whole definition and volume representation of the tunic. In the upper folds of the tunic around the sun ornament areas, I am focusing on keeping most of the tones in warm values. Trying to imagine ultramarine tunic under the sunlight. The areas under the sun rays will be affected with a yellow light creating greenish turquoise values. Therefore, for stronger contrast, I want some of the color in contrast with the warm blue. I'm adding magenta in a very thin layer, with the soft brush strokes and brush movements in folds shade areas. With adding magenta, I'm achieving stronger tonal contrast. And with contrast, I can add better volumes and definition of the tunic. When adding textures in shades, I'm also using soft brush strokes, leaving this thin paint with the tip of my brush, creating more definition of material feel. For the lower part of the tunic, my idea is to keep the colder tonal values. So once again, I'm applying soft and thin layers of ultramarine paint, highlighted with white. I'm adding brighter blue tones in the highlights by adding white paint into the mix with ultramarine. This time I don't want to add Naples yellow. As I proceeded, I added magenta in mix with ultramarine and white to create some of the lilac tone highlights. And I add magenta in some of the shades the same way as the upper tunic areas. Idea for the lower part of the tunic next to the colder values is to keep highlights muted, so all of the tones of the lower part don't get too light in the values. This way I achieve better overall body volume of the character. Depending on the material you are painting, you can go more or less strong with light reflections. I wanted to give Sir Roderick almost silky looking tunic, showing him as a bright and stoic character. I'm adding white into ultramarine and Naples yellow mix, brightening up the highlights as I'm slowly and more detailedly adding brush strokes and thin layers of paint, creating a texturized, soft reflective surface. Proceeding to the definition of the tunic folds, giving more information to the character's body, pose, and dynamics. Once again, I am mixing Naples yellow, magenta and red, creating a base for golden details. I am applying this tone to the light areas of the tunic borders. As I apply lighter layers, I am shrinking the areas of application and brightening tone. First with Naples yellow, then with adding white. Don't forget, every tiny detail of light, shade, tone and texture helps you in your painting narrative. With this, we are finishing the second part of Sir Roderick tutorial. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Both Aleksandra and I are looking forward to see your practices. Share your works with us on our Discord channel and social medias, and stay tuned for the next part of Sir Roderick Paint Along series. See you in the next episode. Bye bye.